Chapter 8 You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. The scheme. There were 4 kinds of delicate dished on the table as well as a small pot of porridge. The porridge was very fragrant. It was just that Shu Huan didn't seem to have much appetite. She poked with the chopsticks in the bowl of porridge with a frown on her face. Suddenly, she put her face closer to Gu Shiran's and whispered, "Your excuse was so bad. Would old madam and mistress believe?" Gu Shiran swept disapprovingly over her and asked, "Do you have a better excuse?" "No," Shu Huan shook her head. "Then, isn't it enough?" Gu Shiran pushed the empty bowl to her. "Pour another bowl for me." Shu Huan looked at the bowl twice but didn't move. Gu Shiran looked at her and added a word, "Please." Shu Huan was helpless, she could only pick up the bowl and got up to get the porridge for him. She didn't expect that concubine Yun who was standing at the side would rush over immediately and took the bowl over from her. She smiled slightly, "Second young mistress, be careful of burning your hands. Let me do it." She didn't object that someone was willing to do her work. She sat down and continued to eat her porridge. Just now, Gu Shiran had said that they consummated their marriage just out of the blue and didn't prepare the handkerchief of consummation. What kind of bad excuse was that? While she was thinking, her head was knocked by chopsticks, still thinking. If they don't believe it, no matter what you say they won't believe you. Or are you planning to do it on spot for them to see? How could that be? Shu Huan's face got red and glared at him. Gu Shiran was unconcerned. He picked up a side dish and whispered, "Even if they think I'm lying, what can they do? It could only be like this." However, when old madam left, the gaze she looked at her with was like looking at a fox, temptress. Lin Shi instructed for her to be more careful since second young master's body wasn't well. She got blamed for no apparent reason. She really couldn't accept it. Now, when she recalled the things from last night, everything seemed to have an explanation. He expected she would be in trouble. Was that why he prepared in advance? The maids could also testify and say that she bathed and slept in the main wing last night. This kind of careful protection made Shu Huan feel grateful. She whispered, "Thank you." Gu Shiran didn't understand, "Thank me for what?" "For today's matter." A basin of cold water poured down on her. "No need to thank me. Whether I divorce my wife or not is my business. I don't like it when others intervene." She mistook his affection. Shu Huan then lowered her head and silently ate the porridge. After the two of them finished eating, concubine Yun was able to sit down and eat. Shu Huan looked at the cumbersome rules of this wealthy family and felt sick and tired. Just when she wanted to go take a walk outside, Xiangqin came in with tea. She was studying what kind of tea it was, when she heard Gu Shiran ask faintly, "Who went out of the yard early in the morning?" Xiangqin didn't know and shook her head. Concubine Yun put down the chopsticks and said awkwardly, "When I woke up in the morning, I found out that there was no more of the bird nest that second young master used to eat, so I sent Xiaoyun out to get some." "Is there something wrong?" Gu Shiran didn't answer and just put the cup of tea on the table. "Call her." Xiaoyun was at the small tea room at the moment to boil medicine. In her heart, she was rejoicing that she was lucky. Originally, old madam was angry and wanted to punish them. She didn't expect that when second master mentioned the consummation of the marriage, she forgot about the punishment. While she was thinking, she heard that Gu Shiran called for her. She let a small maid watch over the fire before she went to the main wing. When she entered, she laughed, "Second master, did you call me?" Gu Shiran looked at her, "Did you let the matter of last night's fire out?" Xiaoyun paled, quickly lowered her head and said, "This slave hasn't." "Hasn't?" Gu Shiran smiled slightly, "The fire happened at midnight and didn't broke out. Only the people of this yard knew. If it wasn't you who let it out, how would old madam have rushed over early in the morning?" Xiaoyun was stubborn and refuted in a low voice, "There are so many servants in this yard. When there are many people, words get out quickly. Who knows who had spread it? Gu Shiran rubbed his temples tiredly. Whether it was you or anyone else, listen well. In the future, no one is allowed to let what happens inside of this yard spread out. If something gets out, I won't beat nor scold you. I will only deduct 1 month of your salary. If something gets out again, I will deduct 3 months. If it continues to happen, I will deduct a year and 2 years and so on. If one of you think that you have too much salary, you can continue to spread things to the outside world. Xiaoyun bit her lips and didn't dare to say more. Concubine Yun stood up with a face full of apology. The matters of this yard are my affairs. I didn't manage the maids well and let second young master worry. She didn't expect that Gu Shiran didn't bother with her and only gazed at Xu Huan, remember. Ah. Xu Huan was only a spectator and felt that his gaze was like a torch and his insights were clear. She secretly admired him. However, how could she know that he would suddenly turn to her? She said confusedly, remember what? Rules, Gu Shiran said faintly. In the future, these are your affairs. Xu Huan was speechless and secretly glanced at concubine Yun. Sure enough, her face got red like being so ashamed to show one's face. She, couldn't help but sympathize with her. Although she sympathized with her, she didn't act rashly. She couldn't defend concubine Yun against injustice and scold Gu Shiran for liking the new and hating the old. What like the new one? Wasn't a cold basin of water poured over her just now? Seriously speaking, the face she had lost in these 2 days were a lot more than concubine Yun. It was just that her face was thicker. She would forget it after the embarrassment and wouldn't put it in her heart. Concubine Yun was certainly someone thin-faced. While speaking, her voice sounded like crying. Yen doesn't feel that well and will retire first. After that, she was even negligent with the etiquette she always followed. She didn't wait for Gu Shiran to agree, turned and left hurriedly. Xiaoyun and Xiangqian also used an excuse to leave after they saw that the atmosphere wasn't right. Only Gu Shiran still had a face that nothing was the matter. It was as if whether concubine Yun was sad or not had nothing to do with him. Xu Huan glanced twice at him and couldn't help but mutter, heartless and lacking in feelings. Gu Shiran raised an eyebrow, what? Even if she's only a concubine, after all she took care of you for a year. You treating her like this really let her feel bitterly disappointed. Laughter flashed in Gu Shiran's eyes. I didn't expect that I took someone so highly principled, virtuous, warm and kind as my wife. She even began to fight justice for the concubine. Was this sarcasm? No matter which one, none of the 3 words virtuous, warm and kind was suitable to describe her. She sympathized with concubine Yun because she didn't see Gu Shiran as her husband. As for Gu family, she also didn't plan to live here for a long time. She was waiting to find out the situation here and think of a way to make a living. Then, she will get out of here. Being on the outside, she naturally wouldn't take concubine Yun as someone who would threaten her status and love. This was a separate matter from the Confucian moral injunctions for woman which stated to not be jealous. It was just, she couldn't say this out loud. She could only thick-facedly accept it. If you didn't take a concubine, then forget it. But since you took one, you should treat her better. And treat you a bit badly. Xu Huan choked on her words and retorted strongly, are you treating me very well now? Is this still not well enough? The topic had a suspicion of changing in the amorous direction. Xu Huan made the killer move. She stood up and walked towards outside. While she was walking, she said, I won't talk with you any longer. Gu Shiran didn't stop her and only said slowly, fool. You have been sold by the person and still speak up for her. Ha! Xu Huan turned confused, what do you mean? Gu Shiran lowered his head and drank tea. After a while did he say, Xiaoyun is a maid from my wing. Xiangqian is the one who usually follows her, why? Why didn't she let Xiangqian go get the bird nest early in the morning? Because Qiaoyun's mouth didn't have a lock and could say everything without hesitation. Xu Huan recalled the conversation of the maids in front of the room before the fire. Her heart jumped. But she still didn't believe that concubine Yun, a woman who looked so gentle and kind, would also scheme. She couldn't help but argue for her. Why, perhaps Xiangqian was busy with other things at that time and only Qiaoyun was idle. Really? Gu Shiran laughed. Qiaoyun isn't a diligent person. Troubling for half night, presumably she was still sleeping in this morning. Go think about the other things yourself. After he said this, he seemed tired. He closed his eyes to rest and no longer spoke. Xu Huan froze on spot. She thought and thought. In the end, she sighed helplessly. Chapter 9. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Fine time, beautiful scenery. When Xu Huan came out of the main wing, there was no one in the yard. It was very quiet. Originally, she wanted to call Huiyun to accompany her for a walk outside of the yard. After she opened her mouth, she decided to forget about it. The less trouble the better. Thought it would be fine if she stood at the main door and looked at the outside from there. At this time, the sky was very blue and clear. The wind brought a refreshing smell of grass. In the distance, it was densely covered with all kinds of flowers and trees. It was luxuriant. She was faintly able to see the flowing water and the stone bridge. And, also those ancient pavilions which were used to relax. They were like from the paintings. A place that would let people be carefree and relaxed. Xu Huan couldn't help herself from sitting on the threshold and looked at the scene in front of her while pondering about her future. The status of women in the ancient times were very low. It's very difficult to show her face in public and do some business to survive. Moreover, she studied the not-so-usual profession. In the fine arts. Could she put a bench on street and sketch people's face? The more safe and reliable way was to find a husband and marry him. But even if she could get out of Gu family, she would be holding the name of being divorced. Not to mention that others wouldn't take a fancy on her, she also wouldn't fancy these ancient men with many wives and concubines. A dilemma. Thinking like this, it was as if Gu Shiran was treating her quite well. When they first met, he didn't treat her as a stranger and protected her from everything. Xu Huan's face became slightly hot, but she still slowly shook her head. He already has concubine Yun. Moreover, she also had an obsessive disorder with love and didn't like love in triangles. While she was in deep thought, she suddenly heard behind her, "Second young mistress, why are you sitting on the threshold? I will go inside and bring a chair for you." When she turned, she saw that the one speaking was Huiyun. She couldn't help but smile. "No need, I will only sit for a moment. If you aren't busy, don't be in a hurry to leave. Sit down and talk to me." There were differences between the master and servant. How would Huiyun dare to sit with her? She stood at her side and laughed. "The morning rush is already over. I don't have much to do now." Xu Huan knew that she obeyed the rules. Plus, sitting on the threshold wasn't elegant. So, she didn't force her. She leisurely asked about things related to Gu Shiran and while she was at it, inquire about Gu family. Huiyun thought for a moment before she said, "There is nothing to tell about second young master. He had been ill since an early age. He stayed in bed and rarely went out of the yard. Which one of the masters or misses in the family have a good relationship with him?" Huiyun shook her head. "Only eldest young master has the same mother as him. He used to come here before. But in the past 2 years, eldest young master followed master to learn about business. He also married eldest young mistress and didn't have time. So, he came less." Xu Huan thought about Lin Shi who she saw in the morning. She seemed to be just in her early 30s. Xu Huan couldn't help but ask, "How old is eldest young master?" Huiyun grinned. "Eldest young master is 19. He is 2 years older than second young master." The ancient people really matured at a young age. Everyone married so young. After she asked more, she got to know that Lin S was only Master Gu's second wife. She's Gu Shiran's stepmother. His biological mother had passed away a long time ago. No wonder Qiaoyun said that he wasn't favored at home. He was sick all day and didn't see any people. How could he be favored? In the morning, old Madam's attitude towards him was also strict and lacked love. It looked like Lin Shi was caring and considerate towards him, but it may not be truly good. Thinking about the complicated relationship between them, Xu Huan felt headache. And felt more that here was not a friendly place. It was better to get out of here sooner. While they were talking, old Nanny Song, who followed Lin Shi from her maiden home, brought some young maids over. She said Lin Shi was afraid that Xu Huan didn't have enough people at her side and to let her pick two. Xu Huan stood up from the threshold and looked. She saw that the ones in the front were very young. None of them seemed to be over 15. Originally, she wanted to decline, but then she remembered that all the maids of Plum Flower Pavilion were also so young. Even Huiyun, who looked older, wasn't older than 16. Perhaps this was Gu family's rule and maybe even the custom of here. She looked again at those girls and pointed at them. The girls were young. After her words were said, those who hadn't been chosen couldn't hide their disappointment. Nanny Song also glanced at her in surprise, but she didn't say much and only said, "Madam said that around second young master, there is concubine Yun to serve and to let second young mistress go pay your respect every day at old madam's and stay to talk with her." She knew that laws of ancient times had to go to the elders to learn the rules. It was just that she had never thought that one day, it would be her turn. Xu Huan laughed while mocking herself, "Okay." After Nanny Song went away with the maids who hadn't been chosen, she turned and looked at the two who were left. One of them was particularly beautiful. Her lips were red and teeth white. Her eyes were very bright. It was like looking into the clear spring. The other one's appearance was a bit below this one. But she was also fine-looking. A touch of gentleness came from her face. She looked very well behaved and clever. She was an ordinary people. She chooses them because they looked pleasing to the eyes. As for whether are good or bad, she would know after getting to know one's heart after some time. Huiyun saw that she only looked at the two silently. She said laughingly, "Second young mistress should name them. Fine time, beautiful scenery to no avail of the sky, the pleasure of the heart is in which one's yard." Xu Huan smiled slightly, pointed at the well-behaved looking girl and said, "Liangchen, fine time." The other was beautiful, so naturally she was Mei Jing, beautiful scenery. Thanking second young mistress for the name, the two maids knelt happily. The etiquettes were made by public. Kneeling was very common to ancient people. People wouldn't feel wronged because of it. She will also not stop them. She only asked for their age. As expected, Liangchen was 14 and Mei Jing 13. 1 year was added in the age of ancient people, meaning they are in fact 13 and 12. Both were small dolls. While she thought about Nanny Song's look of surprise, Xu Huan still felt a bit uncomfortable. She quietly asked Huiyun, "Did I pick wrongly?" Huiyun looked at Liangchen and Mei Jing. Then, she shook her head. Xu Huan continued to ask, "Then why was Nanny Song's expression so strange?" This, Huiyun hesitated for a moment and said secretive, "The maids around madam had a good character, but their appearance was just ordinary." One sentence made Xu Huan suddenly come to the realization. Were women of the ancient times too idle and thought about this matter the whole day? They were afraid that their maid's appearance was too good, that the maids would be taken in by their husband and took away their favor. She found it funny and discouraging. To find a man who would only have you in his heart and grow old together was very difficult in such obscene environment. Huiyun was discerning what she, was thinking from her body language. She thought that she, regretted it and said with a smile, would you like me to call Nanny Song back and let second young mistress choose 2 others? Xu Huan shook her head laughingly, no need. These 2 are very good. With Gu Shiran's body, could he still take in maids to share the bed with? Even if he takes one, the one who would have headaches wouldn't be her but concubine Yun. Chapter 10. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Paying respect. Gu Shiran was reading a book while lying on bed and concubine Yun was in the west wing. She, didn't know what she, was doing there. Only when it was time to eat did she, show her face. Her eyes were red. It could be seen that she had cried. Xu Huan didn't know how she spent such a dull day. First, she teased the birds and then she fed the fish. When she didn't have anything else to do, she asked Huiyun to bring her the game Go, and taught Liangchen and Meijing how to play 5.in.ro game. It was a very popular entertainment game. It was simple and easy to understand. At first, she won every battle. She didn't expect that when Gu Shiran saw that they were having a good time, he also came over for some fun. Then, Xu Huan lost every battle. When there was no more money, the bet changed to melon seeds and candied fruits. At the end of the game, the master and her 2 servants lost everything. They could only watch Gu Shiran, who was half lying on the rocking chair while he leisurely drank tea, eat melon seeds and candied fruits. This was really too much. He spat the shell of the melon seeds all over the floor and declared that those who had lost should clean up. The time went by like this and it was finally time to light the lights. Ancient people slept early. After dinner, they ate 2 slices of melon and looked at the moon for a while, then it was time to go bed. Xu Huan used an excuse to go see the east wing. The door was locked again. Presumable, she had to sleep in Gu Shiran's room again tonight. She knew that this was the best and that it was equivalent as having a talisman, but her heart still felt some resistance. As for what she was resisting, she also didn't know. So, she could only enter the room with a gloomy face and hug that incense burner while she went to bed. Gu Shiran found it very funny, but he didn't say anything and let her be. It was concubine Yun who cast 2 glances at it when she came to deliver medicine. Then, she lowered her face. It couldn't be seen whether she was happy or angry. Gu Shiran frowned when he saw the bowl of medicine. I said that I don't want to drink this medicine anymore. From tomorrow on, don't bring it. Concubine Yun said with difficulty. This medicine was prescribed by a famous doctor in the city. He said that you need to drink it for a whole month. If second young master doesn't drink it, your illness will act up again. Gu Shiran said displeased, every medicine has 30% of poison. After drinking medicine for so many years, even if it was a healthy person, he would die from drinking so much. Concubine Yun still wanted to speak but he already lay down and gestured with his hand, there's nothing to do here anymore. Go rest. Concubine Yun looked at the bowl of medicine and helplessly went out with it. After she left, Xu Huan snorted, it would be a wonder if you can be cured without drinking medicine. Gu Shiran turned and stared at her for a long while. Then he suddenly smiled, if I can't be cured, isn't it to your wish? Under the light, his eyes were as bright as the stars and his smile was very seductive. Xu Huan had lost her senses for a moment. She finally understood why she resisted to sleep in the same bed with him. This person was too dangerous. If she became too close with him, she may lose her soul. She didn't want to be entrapped in a household and become a virtuous and good wife. After thinking of this, she couldn't help but look away and timidly retreated to the inside of the bed. When she thought about his words, she couldn't help but feel shocked. He already knew. Was she too obvious? Indeed, she vaguely hoped in her heart for his illness to not get better so soon. Then, of course, she wouldn't have the danger of having to consummate the marriage. However, it was only just a thought. She didn't have such an ugly heart as wishing for him to die from the illness. She wanted to explain. Who would have thought that Gu Shiran didn't want to hear it? He sat half up and blew the candle at the bedside. He said, "I'm tired. Sleep." With last night's lesson, Shu Huan naturally didn't dare to bother his sleep. She lay down, closed her eyes and didn't say more. Early in the next morning, it was still Huiyun who combed her hair. Liangchen was studying at a side. Xiuyu and Meijing brought in a red yarn skirt for her to change into. Shu Huan was startled, such a colorful color. Huiyun inserted a ruby hairpin in her hair and smiled, "This is the rule. Although, it's not the next day of the wedding, but when second young mistress go pay your respect later, you have to pour tea for the elders and give the younger generation money when meeting for the first time. It's more appropriate to dress more formally. If you dress too casually, not only would you break the rule, perhaps old madam would remember something. Then, you would have to suffer again. Money when meeting for the first time." Mentioning money really hurt her feelings. Shu Huan was penniless. She could only look helplessly at Gu Shiran who was still lying in bed and looking smilingly at her dress up. She looked at Gu Shiran. Gu Shiran looked at Huiyun. Huiyun laughed, concubine Yun had already prepared it. "When second young mistress go over, let Liangchen and Meijing bring it, money." Really a capable person. After being schemed by concubine Yun, Shu Huan wasn't so angry anymore. She still wished that she, took over the management work. It would be easier for her then and she also wouldn't be a thorn in others' eyes. After dressing up, Shu Huan looked in the mirror while she frowned at herself who was full of make-up. "Isn't the powder too thick? This will make the skin look white. There's too much blush. It's like a monkey's butt." Huiyun held in her laughter and said, "Second young mistress, don't wipe it. It is the sign of joy." No matter what she said, Huiyun had a reasoning. Shu Huan turned her eyes and glared at Gu Shiran who was laughing at a side. Then, she lifted her skirt and went outside. She hadn't gone out yet, when Gu Shiran reminded, "When you go over, talk more cautiously. If there's something let Liangchen and Meijing come back to tell me." The tone was faint as if he just spoke it casually, but it couldn't hide the concern. Shu Huan felt a warmth in her heart. She couldn't help but nod. The residence of Gu family was very large. There were many mountains, stone and flowers covering the road. They didn't walk for a long time and Shu Huan already didn't know where southeast or northwest was. Fortunately, there was Liangchen and Meijing who led the way so that they wouldn't go the wrong way. The two maids were young and spoke relatively straightforwardly. Along the way, Shu Huan also got some news from them. She got to know that old madam lost her husband at a young age. She had to take care of the household and the business. She also had to raise a pair of legitimate children and one illegitimate child. So, at Gu household everything she said was like a decree. No one dared to violate it. Even till now when Master Gu encountered troubles in the business, he still had to go find her and humbly ask for advice. No wonder the maids were respectful and nervous when mentioning her. They feared that they would accidentally offend this old madam and wouldn't have good days in the future. After hearing these, Shu Huan could only smile bitterly. She could foresee that she wouldn't be fine when paying respect later. However, she had to go. Old madam lived in Pine Crane Hall. There were 5 main wings. It looked a lot more impressive than Plum Flower Pavilion. There was an old pine tree in the middle of the hall. The branches were thick and vigorous. Under the pine tree, a pair of cranes were raised. She didn't know whether it was because they got used to people, but when seeing people, they didn't fly away. They still walked quietly in an elegant posture. 2 maids sat on the steps. When they saw Shu Huan, they quickly stood up and raised the curtain. One reporting to old madam, "Second young mistress has arrived." Old madam just woke up. She was being groomed by Lin Shi and several concubines. Gu family's eldest grandson Gu Shitian's newly wedded wife Fang Shi was also picking flowers for old madam's hair. Originally, they were talking and laughing. When the maid reported Shu Huan's arrival, old madam's laughing and kind face immediately turned serious. As soon as Shu Huan came in, the others had observed old madam's attitude, so they also closed their mouths. The room became dead silent. Gu family's hierarchy till now. Old madam, her husband died when she was still very young. Her son Master Gu has a second wife Lin Shi. Master Gu has 4 sons. The eldest one is Gu Shitian who has the same mother as Gu Shiran. Gu Shitian had taken Fang Shi as wife. Gu Shiran is the second son of Master Gu. He had taken Shu Huan as wife, a concubine Yun. Chapter 11. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Characters. Chapter 11. The punishment of protracted kneeling unpleasant. Shu Huan was already prepared and pretended that nothing was the matter. She paid her respect like how Huiyun had taught her. Old madam humphed coldly and didn't bother with her. Fortunately, Liangchen and Mei Jing brought the tea to let her present it to old madam and Lin Shi. The atmosphere eased slightly. Old madam took over the bowl of tea, took a sip and let someone take a piece of white jade annulus that symbolizes good fortune as the gift of the first meeting. It could be considered that she had recognized this granddaughter. Law. Lin Shi took over the tea and gifted a hairpin with a lotus design. She smilingly pointed at Fang Shi and said, "This is your sister. Law." Shu Huan took another tea and paid her respect, "Greetings to elder sister. Law." Fang Shi's appearance was ordinary, but she wins for being young. Her bearing was graceful and proper. Seeing that she, came with the tea, she, quickly took off a pair of pure gold twisted bracelet made from her arm and said laughingly, "I didn't know that little sister got well and didn't prepare a gift. This pair of bracelets is a bit of my kind feelings. Little sister, don't dislike it. Keep them to reward people." The concubines were Master Gu's. Although their status was below her, but they were elders and also gave her some jewelries. Shu Huan received a lot of valuable things. In her heart, she felt lucky. Fortunately, it wasn't the official next day of the wedding night. Otherwise, this room wouldn't only have these people. Presumably, she would also had needed to gift a lot of money of the first meeting. She said her gratitude well. Behavedly and sweetly. She did as concubine Yun when she, saw her, the first time. She respectfully stood at a side. The eyes looked at the nose pointed at the mouth pointed at the chest. Anyway, she made up her mind. The more she said, the more mistakes she could make. If she didn't say anything, she wouldn't make mistakes. So, if people didn't ask her to talk, she didn't speak. Old madam saw that her behavior was still decent. She didn't have the uneasiness and restlessness of a daughter from a humble family. When she saw the jewelries, she didn't show a bit of greed. The anger in her heart disappeared a bit. Lin Shi looked at Shu Huan for a while and then praised, "I was in a hurry yesterday and didn't take a good look at you. Looking at you today, you are a pretty child." Concubine 1 was originally a dowry maid of Lin Shi. So, naturally she had to comply with her and said laughingly, "This is old madam's and madam's blessing. Second young master is handsome. Now his wife is also so pretty. Their child would certainly be very cute and loved." When a child was mentioned, Shu Huan couldn't help but recall the lie about consummating the marriage that Gu Shiran told. Her heart skipped a beat. Feeling a bit uncomfortable and seeing the blaming look that Lin Shi casted concubine 1, she wanted to say something to liven up the mood. And while she is at it, also bootlick old madam a bit. She didn't expect that. She just opened her mouth when she was reprimanded first by old madam, "What's the use of being pretty? There isn't a bit of properness dressing up gaudy like this while being the main wife. Look at your sister. Law. That is a real girl of a proper family. Still not hurrying to wipe off that blush from your face. Fang Shi saw that old madam compared herself with Shu Huan. She quickly said, "Old madam, little sister is still newly married." Old madam raised her hand to stop her. "You don't have to speak up for her. The less day you are married, the more self-respecting one should be. Shiran is still ill." The meaning of the words was too obvious. Fang Shi's expression was obviously awkward and didn't dare to say more. Concubine Wen knew that she made a mistake and revealed a face of remorse. The expressions of the other concubines were very remarkable. Some took joy in her calamity. Others sympathized with her. Under their gazes, Shu Huan felt very ashamed. "Old madam, even if you have to humiliate others, you don't have to be like this. And in front of so many people." Although she was dissatisfied, she could only be dissatisfied. It was unwise to collide with such a powerful person as old madam. She could only lower her head, take out a handkerchief and wipe the blush from her face. Sometimes, when you dislike a person, no matter what, that person would not be pleasing to the eyes. They can even find bones in an egg. That it was this kind of feeling when old madam looked at Shu Huan. If the consummation of the marriage was true, then Shu Huan was a temptress who disregarded the man's body. If the consummation of the marriage was a lie, then she is even more of a temptress who led her always obedient grandson to lie to the elders. The more old madam thought about it, the angrier she got. She had completely forgotten the originally intention for Gu Shiran to take a wife in hope that the great event of joy would drive away bad luck and hasten his recovery. When she looked at the red dress on her, she remembered that she became a widow from a young age. For more than half her life, she didn't touch such a bright color. She felt it was even more displeasing to the eyes. And because of this, she felt that the way she, wiped of the blush on her face was full of anger and dissatisfaction. After having been strong for half her life, old madam was accustomed to being conceited. How could she let people be impudent in front of her? She reprimanded, "Go. Yesterday, there was Ran who protected you. I couldn't punish you. Since you came to pay your respect today, it seemed that you do know a bit about rules. Then, go kneel in the ancestral hall in the front yard for a day and reflect." Kneeling one day was still worth it if it could eliminate this old madam's anger, write the past mistakes off at one stroke and not to come to her for trouble every few days. Shu Huan accepted with lowered head. She turned and wanted to go outside. Lin Shi quickly stopped her and pleaded, "On such a hot summer, it's not appropriate to kneel under the sun for a whole day. Old madam, it's better to exempt this punishment." Old madam only wanted to vent her anger. How would she listen to her advice? She said, "Then go kneel under the pine tree outside the yard. Zissou, go tell your second young master. Say that second young mistress is staying here. She will return at night." A pretty maid went out. Shu Huan could only kneel outside the yard under the pine tree and looked at the two cranes spinning around her. She felt gloomy and thought that kneeling at the temple was better than kneeling here. Although, she could be sunburned, but there were not so many people who came in and out and she wouldn't feel too embarrassed. At this time, the sky was already bright. The breakfast was prepared in old madam's room. After a while, younger generations from all yards came to pay their respects successively. They were curious after seeing Shu Huan kneel in the yard. After they looked at her clothes, they became aware of her identity. They immediately understood the reason old madam punished her. So, no one dared to come speak to her. They all turned a blind eye when they walked past her. Only the last boy who came shouted when he saw her, "Who are you? Why are you kneeling here?" Shu Huan got a sore knee from kneeling. She impatiently raised her eyes and looked at him. He was about 10 years old. The clothes on his body weren't ordinary. There was also a jade pendant hanging on his waist. She didn't know from which generation of Gu family this young master was. She also didn't know how to call him, so she didn't speak to him. This young master seemed to have a bad temper. Perhaps he took her as a maid. When he saw that she didn't speak, he raised his leg and wanted to kick her, but was stopped by the nanny who followed him. She quickly said, "Fourth young master, you can't kick her. This is second young mistress." Second young mistress. Gu Shiha rolled his eyes, the poor sister. In law that second big brother took as wife. Hey, what kind of gift of the first meeting do you have for me? Shu Huan knelt here. What could she have on her? She couldn't pick up a branch and gift him, right? Besides, this child's behavior was annoying. She was also not happy to coax him. She simply did as if she didn't hear anything and didn't open her mouth. Gu Shiha got angry. "I'm talking to you. Why do you ignore people? Could it be that you are a mute?" He still wanted to say more when he was dragged away by the panic-stricken nanny. "Fourth young master, don't delay here. Quickly go inside. Old madam and madam are waiting for you to go pay your respect." Gu Shiha struggled a bit but couldn't break free. He could only turn back and waved his arms threateningly at her. When Shu Huan saw that, she was amused. This little bean must be truly hedonistic. He wasn't fully grown yet and was already thinking about beating people up. Chapter 12. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Mischievous young master. Plum Flower Pavilion. Gu Shiran's body was weak and he was prone to being worn out. After Shu Huan left, he went back to take a nap. When he woke up, he heard people whispering outside, so he couldn't help but ask, "Who is there?" After a while, concubine Yun lifted the curtain and came in. "Second young master is awake. Do you want to wash up?" Gu Shiran nodded and looked at Zissou, who followed her inside. Zissou paid her respect first and then smiled. "Old madam said that she will keep second young mistress at her place to keep her company. She will let her come back at dinner time. Second young master and concubine Yun can eat first." After Gu Shiran heard this, he was in deep thoughts for a moment and then said, "I got it. You go back and pay respect in my stead." Zissou conceded and went out. While concubine Yun was busily asking the maids to bring water, she also helped him get out of bed. She said, "Second young master doesn't have to worry anymore. You also know old madam's temper. If it was someone she didn't like, she would have already sent that person far away. Since she let second young mistress stay, presumably she likes her." Gu Shiran stood up firmly by supporting himself with his hand on the bedhead. He frowned. "Let Xiaoyun go inquire." Concubine Yun was startled. Only now did she understood that he didn't listen to her at all. She couldn't explain what her heart was feeling. She forced a smile and let Xiaoyun go inquire. Xiaoyun was often lazy when doing errands, but inquiring about gossip was her hobby and she was good at it. She only left for a short moment. When she entered the room again, she said, "Second young master, this is bad. Old madam punished second young mistress by letting her kneel inside the yard. It was said that she had to kneel a day before she can get up. Concubine Yun personally made bird nest porridge. She just came in with it when she heard this. She got distracted and almost burned her hands." Gu Shiran gave her a look. "Be careful." It was a very simple sentence. However, ever since he had taken a wife, she didn't know whether it was because he considered the feelings of the main wife, but he treated her, the concubine, coldly. Hearing such words with concern in them, she immediately burst from joy. However, she didn't show it on her face. She smiled shyly and gently said, "Aha." When she saw that he didn't say more and was just contemplating while staring at the bird nest porridge, she knew that he was still worried about Shu Huan. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart and asked, "Doesn't second young master want to go plead?" "Plead?" Gu Shiran shook his head. If he went to plead, old madam would get angrier. He raised his eyes and looked at Xiaoyun. "What more did you hear?" "Nothing more." Xiaoyun was someone who couldn't hide her thoughts. When she answered, her eyes looked elsewhere. She was obviously saying one thing but meaning something different. Gu Shiran smiled. The rule of this yard is that things can't get out, but if you heard something from the outside that you feel is important, you should just tell truthfully and don't have to have any worries. Xiaoyun hesitated for a moment. It is just some irrelevant gossip. Second young master, don't get angry after I say it. Gu Shiran nodded. After this did she say, I heard the lower-ranked maids in old madam's room talk about second young mistress being punished. They also said that the day before yesterday, when second young mistress's family came to send the gift on the third day of the marriage, they were blocked by the doorkeeper and didn't report to you. The day before yesterday. Concubine Yun said, wasn't that the day old madam ordered to keep watch on second young mistress? Xiaoyun nodded, yes. Concubine Yun said, these keepers of the household should be punished. They looked down on people the most. Gu Shiran looked at her once but didn't say anything. Xiaoyun hesitated for a moment and then told them the scene of the quarrel of fourth young master and Shu Huan. She also said, fourth young master's temper had always been bad. Old madam also pampered him. If he said some bad things without thinking while paying his respect, presumably second young mistress. She didn't continue, but Gu Shiran already understood. After he asked some more things, he called Huiyun inside. He whispered something to her. Huiyun nodded and went away. At Pine Crane Hall, Shu Huan was already full of sweat from kneeling. She somewhat couldn't take it anymore. She raised her eyes and saw that there was no one in the courtyard. So, she changed kneeling to sitting. It was just, she didn't even have time to take a breath, when she saw Gu Shiha rush out of the room like a locomotive. She had to kneel with a straight back again. Gu Shiha rushed to her side. He first gestured with his hand to let the two maids who kept watch retreat. Then, he walked to her. With his hands on his back, he circled 2 times around her. He smiled eerily, old madam, let me come keep watch on you to see whether you were kneeling well. A brat who liked to put on an act. It must be that he made an excuse to slip out and came to poke fun at her. Shu Huan raised her eyes and saw that the nanny didn't follow him. When she recalled the hedonistic behavior he showed just now, she couldn't help but reveal a bitter smile. She said helplessly, fourth young master, I'm not free at the moment. Can you go play elsewhere? Gu Shiha turned a deaf ear to her words and said, so, you aren't a mute? Of course not. Shu Huan was speechless for a moment. She tried to coax him, you don't have to go study. Study. Gu Shiran snorted and said disapprovingly, who has the patience to study? Those old teachers are so long-winded. Last time, this master gave one a hard time and he resigned. After 1 month or so, father invited another teacher. This time, it had been 2 months already. The shadow of the teacher isn't even seen yet. This young master will be free and unfettered for a while first. Shu Huan sneered and insincerely praised him, then, you are really amazing. Gu Shiha was young and had been spoiled from an early age. He was naughty and mischievous but didn't understand much about human emotion. He also didn't have profound thinking or scheming thoughts. He just took it as if Shu Huan was truly praising him. He liked to hear beautiful words and proudly raised his head, of course. He also asked, do you want to see how this young master mess with someone? Shu Huan quickly shook her head, I know you are very amazing. There is no need for a demonstration. Gu Shiha got in the mood. Why would he care whether she agreed or opposed? His gaze turned and fell on the pair of cranes in a distance. Then, he rushed over. Presumably, the cranes had been tortured so many times by him that they became afraid. When they saw him approach, they ran chaotically in the yard. But in the end, he still caught one. He reached out and plucked 2 feathers, making that crane cry out loudly. Shu Huan looked at it and felt bad for the crane. Plus, she knelt for a long time. Her knees also hurt. She sweated even more. The cry of the crane alarmed the people in the room. A maid came out to see what was the matter. When she saw that Gu Shihe was torturing the cranes again, she couldn't help but say with headache, "Fourth young master, please have mercy. This crane had been brought home by master last month from outside. The other ones that were raised had already been scared to death by you." Gu Shihe said violently, "Go. Mind your own business. Wouldn't it be fine as long as you did as if you saw nothing?" The maid was stunned by him and bit her lips while feeling aggrieved. At this moment, Zissou came out of the room. She grabbed her hand and walked to the room. She said, "Old madam said that these few days, fourth young master doesn't have to go to school. Presumably, he is very bored. Let him play." After Shu Huan heard that, she was truly speechless. Animal cruelty. They didn't even bother with this. Really spoiled him with no boundaries. When this fourth young master grew a bit older, presumably he would murder and commit arson. She could only lament. She had no place to meddle in other people's business. Moreover, when Gu Shihe saw that the maids went away, he put his hands behind his back, smiled evilly while he came closer to her. It looked like an evil young master trying to take liberties with a woman from a good family on the streets. If it wasn't because she knew that he was still young and didn't have such dirty thoughts, Shu Huan almost blurted out the word hooligan. Chapter 13. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Tease. What could the feather of a crane be used for? Decoration. Wrong. In the hands of Gu Shihe, it became a tool to mess with people. He could use the feather to scratch people's neck and made it itchy. And even insert it into one's hair because it was funny. In short, he did everything what a child could came up with, especially when it was childish and a bad thing. Shu Huan had been pestered beyond endurance by him. It happened that she couldn't move to avoid it. She couldn't smile at him anymore. She pulled that crane feather that was inserted in her hair, tore it and threw it on the ground. She said, "Don't bother me. Go play elsewhere." Gu Shihe lost face. He opened his mouth and seemed that he was about to cry. Shu Huan panicked a bit. The old madam inside spoiled him so much like this. If she made him cry, wouldn't another crime be added onto her? She quickly pulled out a smile and wanted to coax him. Who would have thought that he would break into laughter immediately? He retreated 3 steps and said proudly, "You fell for a trap." Although her current body was only about 4 to 5 years older than Gu Shihe, but Shu Huan's real age was already 20. He made her angry and she couldn't take his tricks anymore. From her gritted teeth she said, "Childish. What did you say?" Children didn't like it the most when people say they were childish. The moment Gu Shihe got angry, he immediately swayed his fists at her. But he took Shu Huan's identity into consideration. No matter what, she is his sister. In law. His fists didn't land on her. In the end, he humped once, turned and ran away. Shu Huan let out a sigh of relief. She saw that he ran inside and was afraid that he would go complain. Although she wanted to stop him, she had no way of stopping him. Besides, there was no difference in being pestered by him and being punished. So, she let it in the hands of fate. However, she didn't expect that someone as childish as Gu Shihe occasionally would come up with creative pranks. When the kid came back with a blue and white porcelain vase and told her to look inside, she almost vomited. It was full of wiggling worms. They looked like maggots. Their color was yellow-brown. She got goosebumps all over. "How is it?" Gu Shihe pinched his nose and said, "It's to feed the birds." Shu Huan gnashed her teeth, "What do you want to do?" He was honest and said, "Pour the worms from your collar to inside your clothes." Evil. Shu Huan really wanted to faint. It happened that her senses were still tough, and she didn't faint. Knowing that Gu Shihe wasn't threatening her and that it was really possible that he would do such an evil thing, but she couldn't beat a child. Besides, even if she had the heart to beat him, she may not be the opponent of this diabolical little brat. She could only get up from the ground, turned and ran to the outside of the yard. Punishment of kneeling, rules, you can all go to hell. She was fed up. Inside this demonic place, the old one is strict and harsh. The small one is evil and lacking in class. It was definitely not a place for people. It was just, she knelt for too long. Her lower limbs were numb. She didn't run for 2 steps when her legs went soft and she sat on the ground again. She saw that the little bastard Gushiha chased after her and held the blue and white porcelain vase to pour on her body. At this time, a head with his hair rolled up in 2 buns peeked inside the yard. He shouted at Gushiha, "Fourth young master. Fourth young master." Gushiha tuned and saw that it was his study companion Ranmo. He was immediately irritated and asked, "What?" Ranmo anxiously beckoned at him, "Fourth young master, come out for a moment. It's an urgency." Gushiha was still hesitating. Shu Huan had already taken this opportunity to stand up. She raised her hand, pulled the blue and white porcelain vase from beneath. Caught off guard, Gushiha didn't use force to hold it. The blue and white porcelain vase went out of his hand, half in the air and tilted slightly over. He was flustered and wanted to catch it, but he finally remembered what was inside of it and promptly retracted his hand. The blue and white porcelain fell on the ground and smashed into pieces. The worms were like rain. Some fell on his blue satin shoes and were still wiggling. Although Gushiha wasn't afraid of these things, but seeing this situation now, his scalp also became faintly numb. He quickly shook his feet to shake off the worms. When he was about to go find Shu Huan to settle the account with her, she had already gone far away. Ranmo came into the yard, pulled him and said, "Fourth young master, don't play anymore. Quickly come with this small one." The worms were already scattered on the ground. No need to be afraid anymore. Shu Huan let out a sigh of relief after she saw that Gushiha was being dragged away. She turned and saw that no one from inside the room came out to take a look. She walked back to Pine Tree, but she didn't want to kneel anymore. So, she sat on the floor and rubbed her sore and stiff knees while she sighed. Just now, she really had the thought of leaving here without any regard for anything else. Presumably, this was the so-called impulse. Now, she had calmed down a bit. The most sensible thing was to pretend that nothing had happened and continue to kneel. However, she grew up in the modern society where people were relatively free and equal. She had a stubbornness inside her. No matter how she succumbed and endured, there was a limit. If this limit wasn't surpassed, she could smile and let the matter pass. If this limit was surpassed, she was the type that wouldn't cry even if she saw a coffin. She knew very well about the pros and cons, but it happened that she didn't want to kneel anymore. Shu Huan was tired, moody and pissed. Gushiha was also furious. He was just dragged to the outside of the yard by Ranmo, when he threw off Ranmo's hand irritatedly and asked, "What the hell is it?" Ranmo knew that his temper was bad and smiled, "Fourth young master, don't ask. In short, it's a good thing. Just follow me." Gushiha put his hands on his waist. "If you don't tell me, I won't go." Ranmo could only lean to his ear and whispered a few words. Gushiha's eyes immediately shone. "Really?" Ranmo said dissatisfied, "Could it be that master think I am coaxing you? Then what are you waiting for? Let's go quickly." While Gushiha was talking, he lifted his robe and ran. Without a moment of word, he left Ranmo far behind. The sun was getting higher. Under the pine tree, it was a lot cooler without the sun. Shu Huan leaned against the trunk and sat while holding her knees. She was thinking silently. It was too quiet that it was a bit abnormal. After a while, Gushiha's nanny Xiao Shi came out of the room to inquire. Seeing that Shu Huan was sitting, she was startled at first. Then, she saw that Gushiha had disappeared and there were porcelain pieces and worms on the ground. She immediately understood what had happened. She turned and went inside the room to report. After a while, Shu Huan saw that old madam came out supported by Feng Shi. Lin Shi also followed. She, thought. This little brat really has face. He was only dragged away to play and was able to muster such large forces and made old madam come out to inquire. However, the first thing old madam said was to reprimand her. I let you kneel, you dare to slack off secretly and violate the order. It was obviously out in the open, all right. Shu Huan stubbornly bit her lips and didn't say anything. Old madam got angry and asked, where is Shiha? Where did he go? She was punished to kneel here and not ordered to look after that little brat. How come she would ask her when he disappeared? However, when she saw that old madam was truly angry and was afraid that she would really mess up with the anger, so, Shu Huan sighed privately. When she was about to answer, she saw Gu Shiha breathlessly rush over to hear. He hurriedly shouted, Old madam. Grandson. Is here. To old madam this voice was like a fairy's. Her frown immediately stopped frowning. Her face was full of smiles and she looked very kind. Chapter 14. You are listening at novelfull.audio. TL note. Bonus chapter for no apparent reason. Chapter 14. Unexpected pleading. Looking at the sudden change in old madam's expression, Shu Huan sighed. She felt a bit unfair for Gu Shiran. They were both her grandsons, but the attitude she treated them with was very different. Towards Gu Shiran, she was more stern than loving. Towards the little brat in front of her, she doted and loved him very much. It seemed that being biased was something that had existed since ancient times. Gu Shiha, this guy was also very quick-witted. He didn't reveal any bad behavior in front of old madam. He looked like an ordinary child who would make someone love him. At the right time, he was like a sparrow, talking non-stop and making old madam laugh very much. She hugged him and kept saying that he was her treasured baby. He said attentively, Old madam, outside here is very hot. This grandson will escort you to inside. Good. All right. Old madam was so moved by his filial piety. She only knew to repeat the word, all right. Feng Shi and the concubines watched at a side. They kept saying that it was worth it that old madam doted on him so much and that fourth young master was filial. Even Lin Shi's face was brimming with smiles. The way she looked at Gu Shiha was also full of love. Shu Huan understood now that this fourth young master was presumably Lin Shi's child from the legitimate line. A group of people surrounded old madam and escorted her inside the room. However, old madam didn't take 2 steps, when she felt that something was wrong and turned back. Is she going to punish her, Shu Huan quickly lowered her head. Who would have known that old madam hadn't spoken yet, when Gu Shiha rushed to say, Old madam, this grandson wants to ask a favor from old madam. Don't punish second sister. In law anymore. Can you let her play with me? When this sentence was said, half of the people present were shocked. They all knew the temper of this master. If he saw someone being punished, it would already be alright if he didn't play tricks and mess things up. Pleading was something that had never happened before. Shu Huan was also shocked. She hadn't thought that the situation could have such a strange turn of events. The smile on old madam's face vanished a bit. She looked at him and said, How come you suddenly think about playing with her? Gu Shiha smiled innocently and pointed at the broken porcelain. Second sister. In law dares to play with the worms and with me. As long as one was a woman, presumably, she wouldn't have any good feeling for worms. Old madam frowned disgustingly and looked weirdly at Shu Huan. All right, please. Gu Shiha saw that it wasn't going that well. He began to act cute. Seeing how he was acting cute, twisting old madam's arm which was very different from his playful image from earlier, Shu Huan's mouth couldn't help but twitch involuntarily. Feng Shi kindly smiled at a side and said, That's right. Little sister and fourth young master are close in age. Presumably, the two could play together. Besides, she already knelt for little than a half day. Old madam, please do him the favor. Old madam couldn't stand Gu Shihe grabbing her arm and shaking it so much, she slapped his hands away annoyingly. Alright, alright. Don't shake anymore. My old bones are almost scattered by your continuous shake. Old madam agreed. Old madam nodded helplessly. Gu Shihe cheered, ran to Shu Huan and pulled her from the ground. He dragged her to outside of the yard. Lin Shi quickly shouted, "Where are you going?" "Take a walk in the residence." Old madam tapped the crutch heavily on the ground. Slow down, slow down. Don't rush and fall. Otherwise, you can lose your teeth. I got it. After that promise, Shu Huan was already dragged outside of Pine Crane Hall by him. Her mind was a mess now. She didn't understand why the little brat who played tricks on her would plead for her in the next moment. She didn't believe the explanation he gave old madam at all. Liangchen and Mei Jing also chased after them. They shouted, "Second young mistress, wait for us." Shu Huan stopped in her tracks. So troublesome. Gu Shihe was a bit impatient and revealed 20% of his impatient nature. Shu Huan gave him a glance. "Why did you suddenly plead for me?" After she asked this, Gu Shihe was a bit unhappy. "I wouldn't be happy to plead for you. If it wasn't because second big brother said." He hasn't finished speaking yet, when the maids caught up with them. Still gasping for breath, Liangchen said, "Old madam said to let second young mistress take meticulous care of fourth young master. Don't take him to play with worms, also, she already let the kitchen prepare food that fourth young master likes. And to let fourth master go have lunch at noon." I got it. So annoying. After Gu Shihe heard it, he turned and ran. Shu Huan was stunned for a moment. Fearing that if she didn't keep up with this little brat and lost him, she would be unlucky again. So, she ran after him. All the way, she met a lot of servants. When they saw this impetuous fourth young master, they quickly made way. If someone reacted a bit slower, they would have been kicked by him. This made Shu Huan frown. She thought that if this was her little brother, he would have long been taught a lesson by her. She didn't know the way. Until, after she ran for a while, the scenery became familiar. She discovered that the place Gu Shihe wanted to go to was Plum Flower Pavilion. His study companion Ranmo was already waiting at the entrance. When he, saw him, he happily beckoned, "Fourth young master." Fourth young master. Gu Shihe had long forgotten about the people that followed behind him. He ran into the yard at lightning speed. Shu Huan turned and saw that Liangchen and Mei Jing was running while stumbling. They were about to be planted on the ground. It seemed that the quality of this body was not too bad. She held the frame of the door to recover for a while before she lifted her foot to cross the threshold. She didn't expect that she just entered when something slid past her red satin shoes. It scared her so much that she jumped. When she looked at it again, it was a small hedgehog. It bumped into the threshold, shrank into a ball and turned on the ground. It turned out that Gu Shiran took these small pets to tempt that little brat. Shu Huan's heart was full of gratitude. When she looked at Gu Shihe, he became very obedient when seeing Gu Shiran. He obediently and respectfully put his hand together and said, "Second big brother." Gu Shiran acknowledged him and said, "Put the hedgehog back in the cage. You can find something to feed it." The little brat's face revealed a bit of unwillingness. "Second big brother, didn't you say that if I save second sister in law from old madam, these pets would be mine? Then, I will bring them to my place to play." "Bring them to your place." Gu Shiran smiled slightly, "Would madam let you keep them?" Gu Shihe's face stiffened. Ranmo also desperately pulled his sleeve. "Fourth young master, don't. Did you forget the bat of last time? It went into Madame's room and scared her so much that she was sick for a few days. So be it, Gu Shiran said faintly. The pet would be raised here. When you want to play with it, you can come here. If you got tired of them, I will let people release them back to nature. After these sentences, the little brat hasn't expressed his view yet, when concubine Yun's face paled. She grabbed Gu Shiran's arm and said timidly, raise them here. Gu Shiran raised an eyebrow. He glanced at Shu Huan first and suddenly laughed. Aha! If they are raised inside the yard, it would be inconvenient when the weather is windy or rainy. Then, let's raise it in the east wing. That is my wing. Shu Huan almost jumped. The gratitude in her heart disappeared completely. You live in my wing. After Gu Shiran said that, he called people to move these cages made from iron wire. Chapter 15. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sunbathing in a hot summer day. At this time, it was nearly noon. The sun was at its highest. Although there were plants and trees in the Gu residence, but there were only 3 plum trees with sparse branched in this plum flower pavilion. It was still not the flowering season. They couldn't be used to cover from the sun. At this time, the hot sun shone. The ground was like a hot layer of liquid gold. It also made people unable to keep their eyes open. In such a hot weather, others couldn't wait to find a place to hide and to cool down. Gu Shiran had done something that made a group of people stunned. He wanted to bask in the sun. Standing under roof, looking at Xiaoyun and Huiyun busily moving things out of the room, Gu Shiha quietly moved to Shu Huan. With a very low voice, he asked mysteriously, is it that aside from having problems with the body, second big brother also have a problem with his mind? Shu Huan swept her gaze over him. She very much wanted to refute him, but unfortunately, she also felt that there was a problem with Gu Shiran's mind. Otherwise, sunbathing for an hour with his frail body, wouldn't he get a heatstroke and faint? However, if it wasn't because today was a very hot day, she wouldn't object him to bask more in the sun. It's good to the body. Concubine Yun was very worried and advised, second young master, I've only heard about people wanting to cool down. When was there someone who would sunbath on purpose? Only those villagers who had to work in the field had no way but to bask in the sun. You. She hadn't finished speaking yet, when she was interrupted by Gu Shiran's hand gesture. Concubine Yun sighed and didn't continue to speak. In the past few days, she found out that this master wasn't so well to talk to like how he used to be. If he decided on something, even if she talked till her saliva had dried up, he wouldn't change his mind. She could only glance once at Shu Huan in hope that this second young mistress could persuade him. Shu Huan had her head lowered because she was talking with Gu Shiha. She didn't see the glance, so naturally she didn't persuade. Concubine Yun sighed again. She looked infatuated at Gu Shiran without speaking. She really didn't know why he would protect this new young mistress like this. Was it because he likes her? Except for her straightforward personality, a woman who didn't care about her own husband and whose appearance was childlike, what else could she have to let people like her? After a while, Gu Shiran leisurely laid on the bamboo lounge chair. There was a small sandalwood table on the side. On the table was a teapot the size of a big palm. There was also a small plate of fresh watermelon cut into pieces. On the watermelon was a delicate silver toothpick. What made Shu Huan speechless was that Xiaoyun stood behind the lounge chair. She held a paper umbrella in her hand and blocked the too hot sun above his head. And also, Huiyun who held a fan and used extremely gentle and slow speed to fan him. She had to admit that in the past, she used to think that the ancient life was inconvenient. That was the case for the poor. For the children of wealthy families, everything was done by the servants. There was no inconvenience. She looked at the little brat who recovered his thoughts and was concentrated on teasing the hedgehog. When she looked at Gu Shiran again, she felt that they were truly brothers. They were quite alike in some aspect. Unable to restrain herself, she criticized, "Aren't you too inhuman being like this?" Inhuman. Gu Shiran's expression was unfathomable. After staring at her for a while, he suddenly laughed. He beckoned her with his index finger to let her come closer. Xu Huan moved to his side. He said, "Closer, I have something to say." Xu Huan lowered her body a bit. He came close to her ears and said in a very low voice, "If you can't wait to verify the problem of humanity, intercourse, we can try it at night." The warmth of the breath lingered in her ear and made it itchy and numb. Xu Huan was stunned at first. Then, she got angry because of shyness. Her whole face became red. She actually had forgotten that humanity had another meaning. It happened that this person still looked at her smilingly. There was teasing in his eyes. "What do you think?" Hateful. It wasn't easy for Xu Huan to blurt out one word. While blushing she fled. Until when she ran into the room, she could still hear his low-pitched laughter. She couldn't help but get more annoyed. However, she was to blame herself for this incident. Why talk about humanity with someone from the ancient times? At this time, Gu Shihe came in with a cage containing a lizard in it. He curiously asked, "What did second big brother say to you? Why is your face red like a monkey's butt?" Xu Huan caressed her face and said annoyed, "What does it have to do with you? Hey, good intentions aren't repaid." Gu Shihe said dissatisfied, "I originally wanted to tell you that after you came in, concubine's expression was very remarkable. Since you don't want me to butt in, I won't tell you." Didn't he already tell her clearly? He really is a child. Gu Shihe squatted and gently caressed the lizard in the cage while he rejoiced in other people's misfortune. "You can't win against second big brother. Only today did I discover that he appeared genuine but is actually cunning. But he is quite interesting." Xu Huan retreated 2 steps and looked with vigilance at the lizard in his hand. She silently cursed in her heart, "Aren't you the same? Appear genuine, but is actually quite cunning." She didn't know whether this little brat truly feared his second big brother a bit or that it was something else, but at this moment, he didn't have the mind to tease Xu Huan. He picked a chair and sat on it. He played with the lizard. Xu Huan was interested in inquiring about Gu family's situation from him. She took a chair far away from him and began to talk to him. Who would have thought that she hasn't spoken 2 words yet, when old madam sent people to call him over for lunch. Originally, this master refused to go but finally Gu Shiran ordered, "Go, come again to play in the afternoon." Only then did he obediently go away with Ranmo. After less than an hour, when Gu Shiran got enough of the sun, the meal was also ready in Plum Flower Pavilion. Presumably, it was because of his illness, the food here was very light. There was almost no meat or fish. Every meal, there were only a few light dishes on the table. Xu Huan wasn't that much of carnivore. Besides, the moment she woke up, she went to pay her respects and didn't have time to eat yet. At this moment, her chest was already sticking to the back. She didn't care whether it was vegetables or meat. As long as she could eat it, it was fine. It was Gu Shiran who lost appetite after seeing the boiled green eggplant and tofu. After 2 bites, he put down the chopsticks. When concubine Yun saw this, she revealed worry, "Second young master, is it that you feel unwell again because you didn't take the medicine?" She called Xiangqian to let her go boil medicine. Gu Shiran stopped her and said, "After drinking the medicine, I will lose appetite even more." Xu Huan raised her head while she was busily eating rice and said, "I think he feels that this meal doesn't have any oil in it." Concubine Yun shook her head, "Second young master's stomach is too weak. He can't eat greasy things. It doesn't have to be too heavy, but things like chicken, duck, fish and shrimps should be eaten in moderation. The nutrition would be balanced then." Alright, Xu Huan admits that she was trying to improve her meals by using Gu Shiran. 14-15 years was the growth period. If she didn't eat some protein, wouldn't she continue to be a bean sprout? Concubine Yun still insisted, the fish will burn the insides. The meat is phlegm. Eating these will make it easy for the disease to stay in the body. Gu Shiran had always been taken care of by Concubine Yun. She was a bit more authoritative. Shu Huan felt she didn't have the qualification to advise. So, she didn't speak anymore. However, her gaze couldn't help but sneak a peek at the towering chest of Concubine Yun. After looking at it, she looked at those of herself. It was simply the comparison between a plateau and the hills. Jealous, ah. When she was immersed in her thoughts, her head was knocked by Gu Shiran's chopsticks. What are you looking at? Eat. She was discovered. Shu Huan felt very embarrassed. Her whole face almost buried in the rice bowl. She didn't dare to lift it up. She heard Gu Shiran say, from tomorrow on, add 2 dishes with fish or meat at every meal. Chapter 16. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The illness examination. The ancient life was spent relatively leisurely. Shu Huan had paid her respect in the morning and wasn't sure whether she should also go in the afternoon. But Gu Shiran and the maid didn't mention anything, so Shu Huan wouldn't go over there just to be scolded again. She picked a lounge chair and sat in the ventilated, shaded area of the hall. While dangling, she began to feel sleepy. While she was dozing off, Gu Shihe came again to wreak a bit of havoc. She didn't know which one of the cages was knocked over. She only heard a few maids and Concubine Yun screaming in the yard. She originally intended to go take a look, but she felt that her whole body didn't have any strength and she couldn't submit any strength. Later, she fell asleep. When she woke up, Concubine Yun brought iced sour plum soup over. It was just that her slightly lowered eyes looked a bit swollen. It looked like she had cried. Shu Huan took over the bowl and looked curiously at her. What is it? Did you get bullied by that little brat? Concubine Yun lowered her head to conceal her reddened eyes. Nothing. I was just scared by a snake. Snake. Shu Huan shrunk deeper in the chair. She looked outside and asked, where is he? Concubine Yun said gloomily, he already left. He said that he will come again tomorrow. While they were talking here, Xiangqian came in to report, Dr. Ji came. He is waiting outside. Do I have to invite him in? Concubine Yun said, this is the doctor who used to treat second young master's illness. Every few days, he will come to check second young master's pulse. Does second young mistress want to avoid him? Shu Huan just woke up. She was too lazy to move. She said, when the doctor comes, did you avoid him? It was just a simple question, but Concubine Yun showed a cautious expression. She lowered her head and said, no. Yan's status is low and doesn't need to avoid people. Besides, it's necessary to remember Dr. Ji's words to arrange the maids to make the medicine properly and to avoid certain food. So, I had always not avoided him. Shu Huan drank the sour plum soup slowly and smiled slightly. Then, I also won't avoid him. Invite him in. Xiangqian went out and invited the doctor in. He was unexpectedly young. He looked in his early 20s and had a wooden hairpin in his hair, which bound his hair together. He looked quite gentle and was dressed in a sky-blue robe. He held a medicine chest by his side. His pace was not slow as he crossed the threshold with a fixed gaze. When he saw Shu Huan, he was stunned for a moment. He couldn't guess her identity, but she didn't seem like a maid. He bowed slightly and paid his respect. Then, Concubine Yun went to greet him. She familiarly began to talk with him about Gu Shiran's diet and physical condition. With a concerned look, she invited him to the inner room. Xiangqian also followed them. After being pointed out by Gu Shiran, Shu Huan could see that Concubine Yun was intentionally taking over things she, should do and made her stand at a side without anything to do. This act of pushing her aside without using a word or movement made her feel that she was a dispensable excess. But then again, she was originally not someone from here, so she had nothing to worry about. Moreover, she didn't have a sense of belonging here and only wanted to muddle along with the days. While thinking, she lowered her head to drink the sour plum soup. The sweet, sour and cold taste made her frown slightly. When she looked at the blue and white porcelain bowl, there were many clear water drops at the corners. Her hands also got wet. Suddenly she felt that it was funny. The current her really seemed like a lady trapped in her own boudoir. She had a life of luxury but was an infinite lonely lady from the ancient times. She only thought for a moment and that Dr. G came out from the inner room with a flabbergasted look. After Xiangqian put down the curtain, concubine Yun asked anxiously, "Dr. G, did our second young master's illness got a bit better?" Dr. G shook his head and said, "Strange." Concubine Yun didn't understand. What is strange? Did the illness have a change because he didn't take the medicine on time? Dr. G muttered to himself, "The pulse is strange." It seemed that he didn't have a grave illness aside from his body being a bit weak. He got well. Concubine Yun was shocked. Xu Huan also felt a bit surprised. The last time I visited, the illness was still deeply rooted in his body. Dr. G thought for a while and shook his head again. "I don't know whether he got cured or that it changed into a difficult disease that's out of my expertise. I'm not so sure about it. It's better to invite 2 more doctors to come take a look. When I go back, I will also go look through some books. After a few days, I will come to check the pulse again." "No need." When this voice was heard, everyone turned their heads. Gu Shiran came out and supported himself against the doorframe. He smiled at Dr. G, "I know my own body. No need to have someone come to take a look. Can Dr. G have a private talk with me? I have something to ask." They didn't know what Gu Shiran have to discuss with that doctor. The two went into the inner room for a private talk. The voices were very low. Those on the outside couldn't hear anything at all. Xu Huan was in deep thoughts while holding that blue and white porcelain bowl. Concubine Yun, on the other hand, wasn't as calm as her. Her entire expression showed tension. She couldn't help but circle around in the room. It made Xu Huan a bit dizzy when looking at her. She then let out a sigh. Looking at this, it seemed that concubine Yun truly cared about him and had deep feelings for him. The 2 men talked for about an hour. Gu Shiran then sent Dr. G out. After the doctor left, concubine Yun rushed over to support him. Half happy, half worried, she said, "Second young master, although Dr. G is a famous doctor, but he wasn't clear about this illness. It's better to find 2 more doctors to come take a look. We can also rest assured if you really got well." Gu Shiran stubbornly shook his head. It could be seen that the talk had costed him a lot of energy. He looked tired. You can't spread this matter to outsiders. How things have been before will be how things remain in the future. If someone asks about my illness, say that it's the same as usual. It didn't get better and also didn't get worse. Concubine Yun was very puzzled. "Second young master, if your illness is really cured, old madam will be happy if we report it to her. Also, master and madam are also wishing for you to become better. Why do you want to hide it? You don't have to bother with it. Only remember to not let this get out." While Gu Shiran talked, his eyes swept around the room. Especially, he looked one more time at Xiangqian. "Have you all remembered what I said?" Xiangqian lowered her head and answered first, "Remembered. This slave will not let a word get out. Second young master, please rest assured." Concubine Yun also nodded helplessly. Only Xu Huan bit her lips and looked at him without saying a word. Gu Shiran gave her a glance and beckoned at her. She dropped the sour plum soup and followed him to the inner room. While sitting on the edge of the bed, Gu Shiran rested for a while. He handed a piece of paper to her. This is the prescription Dr. G prescribed to nourish my body. Find a suitable maid to go buy the herbs and personally boil it yourself. Xu Huan took over the paper and looked at it with a surprised look. She wondered, why do you have to be so secretive? Could it be that there was something strange with the previous medicine? Gu Shiran laughed, what are you thinking about? The medicine had always been made by people Yen ordered. What benefits would she get by harming me? That was right. Concubine Yun seemed to be dead set on him. She certainly wouldn't do such a thing. Xu Huan thought for a bit. Then, is it that someone else wants to harm you? How could that be? Gu Shiran didn't hesitate any bit and shook his head. If it was you who was bedridden, sick for a long term, didn't bother with anything else and even didn't go out of the yard, would anyone want to harm you? You are right no matter what you say. Xu Huan sighed, looked at him and said, did your illness really got cured? Why do you have to keep it a secret? Gu Shiran smiled, don't ask. Just do as I say. You will understand some things in the future. The more they talked, the more mysterious things seemed to become. Xu Huan wanted to ask more, but seeing that he closed his eyes a little exhausted, she didn't speak more. She lowered her head and looked at the prescription in her hand. She felt that this matter was really strange. According to reason, shouldn't the person he trusted the most in this plum flower pavilion be Concubine Yun? However, after living together these past few days, she found out that he seemed to alienate himself from Concubine Yun. Today's matter was even stranger. His attitude clearly showed that he only trusted her, sh. When Xu Huan hid the prescription and walked out of the room, she was still touching her face. Could it be that she got a face of the Holy Mother that would let people trust her unconditionally? Chapter 17 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Eavesdropping inadvertently. One should stay loyal while being entrusted by someone. After Xu Huan came out, she went to the study for brush, ink and paper. She had thought it through. Gu Shiran let her find a suitable maid to go buy the herbs, but she had just come. Her understanding of the maids was only what they showed on the surface. She didn't know who was the suitable one. Besides, families of ancient times were strict. It wouldn't be easy for a maid to go out. Usually they had to bother the manservant to run the errand. It would be unclear after this prescription passed through a few people's hands. It was better if she did it more properly. She also didn't have a good idea. She only wanted to copy the names and dosage of the prescription on another piece of paper. She pulled out a medical book from the bookshelf and added 6 or 7 common drug names on the paper. After the ink was dry, she cut the paper. One name on one piece of paper. This will make the prescription confusing. Even if other people had any other motives, they wouldn't be able to see through it. It was quite complicated to describe, but doing it was pretty quick. After all, she had practiced calligraphy before in the past. Her characters didn't have her own style, but they were still neat and clear. It had been a long time since she had written with a brush. After copying all the names of the prescription, she felt a bit of pain on her wrist. After doing all of these, she called Liangchen to let her go buy the medicine with this stack of paper. She also especially reminded her, let the buddy of the pharmacy pack everything apart and write the name of the herb on the outside of the package. Liangchen felt that it was strange, but she knew that she had to do what the master asks without asking. She promised and went out. It was easy to buy the herbs, but it was troublesome to make the medicine. Xu Huan had no knowledge of that. When Liangchen returned, she called Huiyun for help. Anyway, Huiyun was illiterate. From the big stash of herbs, she picked out those she needed and mixed them together. She let Huiyun start to boil them. She stood at a side to command how big the fire needed to be. She didn't feel that time was difficult to spend when she had something to do. While she made the medicine, she chatted with Huiyun. It was a leisure thing. However, when the medicine was half made, Concubine Yun rushed to the small tea room. When she saw her, she said, "Second young mistress, for such a thing like making the medicine, you should just call me. Why bother do it yourself?" Shu Huan shook her head and said, "No need. You can go busy yourself with other things." Concubine Yun saw that Shu Huan refused, so she didn't insist on it. She kept them company for a while. Then, she retreated with her expression a bit dim. After Shu Huan finished boiling the medicine, she filtered the herbs and sent it to Gu Shiran. She lifted the curtain and entered the main chamber. She heard faint and intermittent cries. It seemed to be concubine Yun's. She looked around, but it was quiet. There was no one. Presumably, the servants had been sent out. She felt a bit awkward. When she wanted to leave, she heard concubine Yun say with choked voice, "Ever since I entered Gu family, I only wished to serve second young master for a long time. Aside from this, I didn't have any other thoughts, but now, second young master doesn't like me. I feel wronged in my heart and I don't know what I did wrong. If I really did something wrong, I ask second young master to please tell me. I can change then. If I didn't do anything wrong, I just hope that second young master can still treat me like how you used to." Her words were quickly interrupted by Gu Shiran's cold voice, "There is nothing wrong. Don't think too much." Concubine Yun continued weeping, "It's not that I think too much. It's that second young master's heart doesn't have me anymore. This. Eavesdropping is a bad behavior. Not to mention when it was private affairs. Listening till here, Shu Huan couldn't take it anymore. She quickly retreated with the bowl of medicine. Seeing that Liang Chen and Mei Jing were playing grab the stone in the yard, she beckoned for Mei Jing to come over. She put the bowl in her hand and whispered, "After concubine Yun come out, send the medicine in. If it got cold, warm it up and then send it." Mei Jing promised and took the bowl of medicine. Shu Huan wanted to find a place to stay for a bit, so she looked around. It was such a large yard. A group of strange pets that could harm people was raised in the east chamber. She didn't want to go there. The west chamber was concubine Yun's quarters. It doesn't feel right to go there. Only now did she discover that she had nowhere to go. So, she could only go out of the entrance and take a walk around the other yards in the vicinity. Liang Chen followed her. "Where does second young mistress want to go?" "I will keep you company." Shu Huan declined, "No need. I will take a walk and then come back." At this time, it was nearly dusk. After walking out of the entrance, the road was filled with gravels and flowers on all sides. She also didn't know where to go. She just picked a road. After walking for a while, she saw a gazebo in the middle of the water. She followed the path to go and sat for a while in the gazebo. The scenery outside the gazebo was very beautiful. It was a lush of green when looking out of the gazebo. The adjacent water seemed like a man-made artificial small lake. The water was very clear and flowed slowly. It should be running water. There were a few lotuses growing in it. The evening wind brought fragrances with it. Seeing this scene, Shu Huan's hand felt a bit itchy. She wanted to sketch 2 landscapes. However, it was too much trouble to go back for paper and charcoal strips. It was better to just look at it. However, after just sitting for a while, she couldn't take it anymore. There were many mosquitoes by the water. It was also summer. She had been bitten several times on her bare hands. She estimated that concubine Yun and Gu Shiran should have finished talking. She prepared to go back. She just turned when she saw that at the end of road from where she came from, a young man dressed in white stood there looking at her. Here was the inner residence of Gu family. It was impossible for a stranger to come in. Shu Huan thought that since Gu Shiha was ranked 4th, he must have a big brother above him. Perhaps it was this person. So, she didn't panic and went back to the road where she came from. That young man didn't move. He just looked at her approaching like this. When the two were close enough, Shu Huan was able to see his appearance. He seemed to be about the same age as Gu Shiran. They didn't look alike, however the outline of his face still had something similar to Gu Shiran's. So, she tried to greet him, "Third young master." That young man dressed in white lowered his body slightly and said, "Second sister. Law." The attitude wasn't respectful nor sloppy. It didn't seem like she'd guessed wrongly. Shu Huan smiled slightly at him, but she didn't know what to say. She also felt that the feeling this young man gave was very cold, like the color of his clothes. So, after she stopped for a moment, she brushed past him. When she returned to Plum Flower Pavilion, she didn't see concubine Yun. Xiangqian and two maids were preparing the table. Gu Shiran was already sitting at the table. When he saw her, he frowned slightly. "Where did you go?" Shu Huan didn't answer and asked, "Did you drink the medicine?" Gu Shiran nodded. The eyes staring at the dishes on the table were obviously gloomy. "After drinking it, my whole mouth is filled with bitterness. I already have no appetite." It was Shu Huan who immediately got appetite. After not seeing fish or meat for many days, seeing the bowl of chestnut stewed chicken on the table now made her hungry. She didn't want to talk anymore. She sat down, picked the chopsticks and began to eat. Gu Shiran was a bit dissatisfied. "I said I have no appetite and you still eat so cheerfully." Shu Huan didn't even raise her head and said vaguely, "I have appetite." While talking, she picked up another large piece of chicken and began to eat. She completely ignored the table manners. Anyway, the original owner of this body came from a poor family and not someone from a wealthy and proper family. It was very normal to be a bit crude. She didn't have to pretend. She didn't expect that when Gu Shiran saw that she was eating so deliciously, he immediately and jealously reached out his chopstick. After Shu Huan finished a piece of chicken with her head inside her bowl and wanted to go get another piece, she discovered that there were only chestnuts and a chicken but left in the bowl. She turned and looked at Gu Shiran's bowl. She saw that he didn't have much rice but a whole pile of chicken. She immediately got gloomy and muttered in a low voice, "F***********. Must even fight over this with me." Gu Shiran looked at her and asked, "What did you say?" Knowing that she had sworn, Shu Huan quickly lied, "I said, didn't you say you don't have an appetite? Why are you still fighting over chicken with me? I suddenly got appetite." Seeing Shu Huan's speechless expression, Gu Shiran couldn't help but laugh. He pushed the bowl to her. "Should I share a piece with you? Was there reason to not accept food that was being delivered in front of you?" Shu Huan quickly reached out her chopstick to pick it up, but she retrieved the chopstick half-way through. "Forget it. You eat." Gu Shiran raised an eyebrow, "I haven't touched it yet." Shu Huan shook her head and picked up a chestnut. She lowered her head and ate rice. It was not that she found it dirty. It was that she felt that it was too intimate fighting over food like this. The most important thing was that this happened so naturally. She didn't have any retrains nor her guard up when living with him. When she recalled the words she inadvertently heard from concubine Yun just now, she suddenly lost appetite. Her heart also became vigilant. She felt that if she continues being like this with Gu Shiran, she couldn't promise that love wouldn't breed from familiarity. That would be far from good. The best was to maintain an appropriate distance with him.